Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I want to ask Dr. Barbara Margarian to come up because, as I hope you know, this lecture tonight is being given in memory of Arshad Margarian, architect and friend of all of ours, and I'd like to have Barbara say a few words.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for coming, and thanks to NAASR for making the arrangements. I'm really looking forward to tonight's program. I'm sure it's going to be enlightening. But before we start, I just wanted to say a few words about my husband, Arshad, and his relation to NAASR. NAASR was an important part of his life, and I think it says a lot about him and a lot about NAASR as well. Arshad came to the United States in September 1956 to study architecture at the Harvard School of Design here in Cambridge. A native of Jerusalem and a graduate of the American University of Beirut, he had worked very hard to be able to come to this country, and it was really a dream come true for him. Despite that, he had a very difficult time at first. He didn't know anyone in Boston. He was on a tight budget. He found his courses rather demanding and difficult at first. So imagine his joy at discovering NAASR, where he met all these interesting and congenial people and where he could take part in an endeavor he strongly believed in. It's difficult today to imagine or to describe the excitement and the exhilaration of those early days of NAASR, when the focus of attention was on the establishment of the Armenian chair at Harvard. Fortunately, there are a few old-timers left who remember those old days. There were no chairs in Armenian studies anywhere in the United States. Armenian language courses were hardly offered on the college level, and very little material was available in the English language about anything Armenian. Outstanding professors at Harvard, and here I'm thinking particularly of Richard Fry and William Langer and Oscar Hanlon, were eloquent and inspiring in encouraging the NAASR program to establish the chair. Well, Arshad threw himself into NAASR activities. I don't know where he found the time, but most of the flyers for NAASR events in those early days were designed by him. And if you see them, and I notice Mark has posted them around the building, you can recognize his unmistakable sign, the style, and you can see the small initials AM inscribed somewhere right there. At the Harvard School of Design, Arshad was delighted to study under Professor Conant, who was an authority on medieval Christian churches, and who had published a study of the Armenian cathedral at Ani. So Arshad suggested, and NAASR agreed, to invite Professor Conant to give a talk for NAASR, which he did, and which I understand was very successful. But not all of Arshad's suggestions were so easily accepted. He loved to tell the story in later years about an incident involving another one of his professors, Professor Zeckler, who had known personally and greatly admired the artist Arshil Gorky in New York. Noting that Arshad was not only Armenian, but that his name kind of sounded the same, you know, Arshad, Arshil, Professor Zeckler loved to talk to Arshad about Gorky. So Gorky, Arshad suggested that perhaps NAASR might invite Professor Zeckler here to give a lecture on Arshil Gorky, but he got a totally unexpected response. Apparently, some of the NAASR committee members at the time had memories of Gorky from his early days in Watertown at the Hood Rubber Company. And so they just turned to Arshad and said, "What? You mean a program about that crazy artist who used to paint nudes on door panels? Forget it." So that lecture did not take place, although in later years, NAASR did have many excellent programs about Gorky. It was a great source of pleasure and satisfaction for Arshad, as for all NAASR members and supporters, to witness the tremendous advances made in Armenian studies in the United States over the years, And we've all heard a lot of that in conjunction with the 50th anniversary last year of NAASR. And Arshad was an eager member of the 50th anniversary planning committee as long as his health allowed. Although his field was architecture, he was interested in all aspects of Armenian history and culture and enjoyed so much the intellectual stimulation of the programs here. And of course, it was particularly gratifying for him to observe the tremendous advances made in the study of Armenian art and architecture, as well as the publication of so many beautifully illustrated books which have brought to the world's attention the achievements of Armenian architects through the ages. Architecture is a part of our Armenian culture that can be readily passed on and appreciated by others visually, as notably Professor Lucy de Emanuelian, who I'm really glad to see here today, conveys so effectively in her exquisitely illustrated talks. There's another reason, of course, why NAASR was special for Arshad and for me as well, because we first met at a NAASR meeting after I moved in Cambridge in 1960 to begin my graduate work, but that's another story. In his later years, Arshad made the acquaintance of a young scholar in the field of Armenian architecture who greatly impressed him, not only for the high quality of her research, but also for her gracious manner and personality. And therefore, it is entirely appropriate that the guest speaker for this memorial lecture should be that young scholar, Professor Christina Maranci, and I'm delighted to have her here tonight. Thank you.
You can tell us about meeting Arshad at a NAASR lecture. That would be good to hear. NAASR is all about bringing people together. Our speaker tonight is, of course, Dr. Christina Maranci. She is Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and her research focuses on medieval Armenia and cross-cultural, medieval Armenian architecture and cross-cultural relations with the Byzantine, Sasanian, and Islamic worlds. She's the author of Medieval Armenian Architecture, Constructions of Race and Nation, which we have a very limited number of in the bookstore, I'm sorry to say, because a shipment did not arrive in time for tonight, but it is a wonderful book, and we will be getting it in stock again very soon. Her articles on Armenian art have appeared in many journals: the Revue des Études Arméniennes, the Art Bulletin, the Journal for the Society of Architectural Historians, the Oxford Companion to Architecture. She's also the author of Art History, a survival guide for students. We've had the pleasure of having her speak for us at several NAASR conferences through the years, but this is the first time we are welcoming her as a lecturer. And last time Christina spoke for us was in September at our 50th anniversary symposium, and we had a very funny conversation before that lecture about whether I should tell the audience that she's Armenian, because her name is frequently construed as being Italian or whatever. And I said, well, do you really want me to introduce you and then say, oh, by the way, Christina, Dr. Maranci is Armenian, really, 100% Armenian. Well, she is, and so please welcome Dr. Christina Maranci.